My parents never even bothered to call me by my real name. To them, I was just the dumb one. That was the label they stamped on me from the time I could barely read. Meanwhile, my brother Darren was celebrated like he was some kind of royalty. He was the genius, the pride of the Vale family, the one who made it all the way to Harvard on a full scholarship. On his graduation day, my father stood tall in front of hundreds of guests, bragging about the empire Darren would inherit. He promised him the family's $75 million company, a brand new Tesla, and our $13 million mansion in New York. Everyone clapped like it was a coronation. I sat in the back, invisible, humiliated, wondering how I could ever escape the shadow they forced me into. And then it happened. A man I had never seen before stepped up to me. He leaned down, handed me a thick white envelope and whispered into my ear, "It's time to tell them who you really are." His words sent a chill through me. I turned around to ask what he meant, but he was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about myself and everything my family believed was about to change. I grew up in a house where love was handed out like trophies, and only my brother Darren ever won them. From the earliest days, my father, Victor Vale, made it clear who mattered in our family. Darren was the prodigy, the golden son, the one destined to carry the Vale name into the future. And me? I was just the shadow, until that envelope found its way into my hands. Everything began with that letter. When I got back home that night, the envelope felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. My hands trembled as I sat on my bed, staring at it like it might explode. The front was unmarked, no address, no sender, just my name written in clean, bold handwriting. Evan Vale. Not Evan the failure, not Evan the disappointment, just my name. For some reason, that alone made my heart pound. I tore the seal open and pulled out a neatly folded letter. Inside was a single page, thick paper with an expensive texture. The writing was sharp and deliberate. It read, "Evan, what your family told you about who you are is not the truth. You deserve to know what they've kept hidden. If you want answers, go to 42 Willow Creek Road tomorrow at noon. Come alone." There was no signature. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. The words "what your family told you" burned in my head. My family had lied to me before. Small things, cruel things. But this felt different. Deeper. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, thinking about every strange thing that never made sense. Like why my father always looked at me with distant eyes, like I was someone else's mistake. Why my mother once called me him before catching herself and walking away. And why Darren, perfect, untouchable Darren, had once told me during an argument, "You're not even supposed to be here." At noon the next day, I stood outside 42 Willow Creek Road. It was an old stone building at the edge of town, with ivy crawling up the walls and windows that had seen better days. My stomach twisted as I stepped inside. The air smelled like paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. A woman in her 60s sat behind a desk, her silver hair pinned up neatly. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me. "Evan Vale?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled faintly and stood. "Follow me." We walked down a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets and photographs, old black and white pictures of people I didn't recognize. At the end of the hall, she stopped in front of a door marked Private Records. She opened it and motioned for me to enter. The room was dimly lit, and in the center was a single folder sitting on the table. My name was printed across the front. "This was given to us years ago," she said softly. "We were told to keep it until you came looking." "Who told you that?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated. "Your grandfather, Henry Vale." My throat went dry. "He died before I was born." She gave me a knowing look. "That's what you were told." I opened the folder and my entire world tilted. Inside were documents, birth certificates, adoption papers, and letters exchanged between my father and a man I didn't know. My real birth certificate listed 2 names I had never seen before. I wasn't born Evan Vale. My real last name wasn't even Vale. The woman stepped closer, her voice gentle but steady. "Your father adopted you under unusual circumstances. You were never meant to find out. But someone, perhaps your grandfather, wanted the truth to reach you when the time was right." I could barely breathe. My entire life, every insult, every cold stare, every moment of being treated like an outsider, suddenly made sense, and yet, it felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. Who was I? And why had my family spent years hiding it? I stumbled out of that office gripping the folder like it was a live wire. My hands shook as I tried to process everything I'd just seen. My real last name wasn't Vale. My parents weren't my parents. The man who'd raised me, the one who called me worthless, who compared me to Darren every chance he got, wasn't even my father. I sat in my car for almost an hour, the engine off, staring at the papers. My birth certificate listed my real parents as Samuel and Claire Hensley. I didn't recognize their names, but there was another document tucked behind it. A death certificate. Both of them had died in a car crash when I was just a baby. My father, Victor Vale, had been listed as my guardian, not my adoptive father. And the papers showed something else. A large transfer of money that took place right after the crash. $2 million. Paid from Hensley Industries to Vale Holdings. My pulse raced. What the hell is this? I whispered. The letter that came with the documents said something strange. You were taken in not out of love, but out of debt. I couldn't shake those words. Taken in because of debt? That meant my father hadn't adopted me to save me. He'd done it because he was paid to. I wasn't a son. I was a transaction. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory of my childhood played back like a broken film reel. The way Victor always made sure Darren got everything first. The way my mother avoided eye contact whenever I asked questions about when I was born. The time Darren told me during an argument, "You're just a Vale by name, not by blood." He knew. The next morning I drove to the mansion. My hands were trembling the whole way. I didn't care if I started a war. I needed answers. The front gates were open, and Darren's new Tesla sat gleaming in the driveway. The house looked even bigger than I remembered. Every brick screaming of wealth that had never been meant for me. I walked inside without knocking. My stepmother, Lillian, was sitting at the grand piano, sipping coffee from a porcelain cup. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Evan, what are you doing here?" I held up the folder. "You tell me, who am I?" Her expression faltered for just a second, but it was enough. "Where did you get that?" she asked sharply. "You already know," I said, voice trembling. "You've known my whole life." She stood slowly, placing her cup down. "You shouldn't have gone digging, Evan. Some things are better left buried." "Buried," I snapped. "Like my real parents?" The sound of footsteps echoed from the staircase. Darren appeared, still in his designer clothes, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover. He glanced at the folder in my hands, then at our mother. "He knows," she didn't answer. "Knows what?" I demanded. "That I'm not your brother? That I was bought like some charity project?" Darren smirked, that same arrogant expression he'd worn since we were kids. "You think you were part of this family because they loved you? Wake up, Evan, you were just... Payment." My chest tightened. "Payment for what?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. For silence, I froze. "Silence about what?" Lillian suddenly raised her voice. "That's enough, Darren!" But it was too late. I saw it in his eyes. The truth he wasn't supposed to say. Whatever my father had been hiding, whatever deal he made the day I was brought into this family, it wasn't just about money. It was about covering something much darker. And I was at the center of it. My world tilted that day inside the mansion. Darren's words echoed in my head like a curse. "You were payment for silence." I demanded answers, but Lillian's cold, sharp tone cut through the air. "Leave, Evan. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." But I wasn't a scared kid anymore. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." Darren crossed his arms, amusement flickering across his face. "You really want to know?" "Yes," I snapped. He looked at Lillian, who stared back at him with a mix of fury and fear. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine. Tell him, Mom. Tell him what Dad did to get his precious company." Her composure cracked. "That's enough!" she shouted. I felt a chill spread through my chest. "What did he do?" Darren smiled, almost enjoying the pain on my face. "Our father didn't build Vale Holdings from scratch, Evan. He stole it. From your real father." My stomach twisted. "That's not true." "Oh, it's true," Darren continued. "Your father, Samuel Hensley, was a brilliant engineer. He created the tech that made Vale Holdings explode in the early years. But he trusted Victor, thought they were partners. Then your parents' car just happened to crash after a fight about ownership papers. Convenient, right?" Lillian looked ready to collapse. "Stop it, Darren!" she pleaded, tears forming. "You don't understand what you're saying." But I could tell she did. I could see it in the way her hands trembled. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew my parents were killed." She didn't answer, but her silence was the loudest confession I'd ever heard. Darren shrugged again. "Dad took everything, the patents, the money, the company. Then he took you to make it look like he was doing the noble thing. But really? You were the final piece to keep anyone from asking questions." My knees felt weak. My breath came shallow. "He killed them?" I whispered. Lillian stepped forward, shaking her head. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. There was an argument. Samuel threatened to expose Victor. The brakes on the car failed 2 days later. But there's no proof, Evan. Nothing you can do now will change the past." My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage, grief, and disbelief. You all knew, I said. You lived in that mansion, ate at that table, and called me family, while hiding that my real parents were dead because of your greed. Lillian's voice cracked. We were protecting you! Protecting me? I yelled. You were protecting him! Darren rolled his eyes. So what now? You're going to run to the police with a folder and a sob story? No one's going to believe you, Evan. You're just the forgotten son, remember? I took a step closer until I was inches from him. You might be right, but I'm done being the forgotten one. Before I could say another word, Darren smirked and said, Careful, brother. People who go digging into veil business have a habit of disappearing. He turned and walked out, leaving me shaking with fury. I looked at Lillian one last time. Tell him he can have the mansion, the cars, the money, but I'm taking back what's mine, the truth, she whispered. Evan, please don't do this. You don't know what he's capable of. I looked her straight in the eyes. Neither do you. Then I walked out of that mansion for what I thought would be the last time, unaware that the letter's sender, the mysterious stranger who started all this, was waiting for me just around the corner. And what he had to show me next would make every dark secret I'd just learned look like child's play. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped out of the mansion. My hands were still shaking, my mind reeling from what Darren had said. My real father, murder, lies. Every word felt heavier than the last. I walked aimlessly through the city streets, my thoughts spinning out of control. That's when I saw him. The man from Darren's graduation. The stranger who'd given me the envelope. He was leaning against a black car parked under a flickering streetlight, as if he'd been waiting there all along. You found out, didn't you? He said, stepping forward. I froze. Who are you? He smiled faintly. My name's Arthur Keene. I worked with your real father, Samuel Hensley, and I've been waiting 20 years for someone to expose the Vales for what they really are. My pulse quickened. So it's true? Victor Vale killed my parents? Arthur nodded slowly. He didn't do it himself, but he paid someone to make sure your father's car never made it home that night. Your mother was just collateral. I felt sick. And you've been sitting on this for 20 years? I tried, Arthur said, his voice heavy with regret. But every time I came close to bringing him down, someone got in the way. Lawyers, bribes, threats. Victor's money built a wall around his crimes. But now that he's gone, that wall's starting to crumble. Gone? I repeated, Arthur's expression darkened. Victor Vale died 2 months ago. Heart attack. The empire's in Darren's hands now, and he's just as ruthless as his father ever was. My head spun. Then why now? Why tell me all this? He opened his car door and pulled out a folder. The same kind I'd seen my father's lawyers use. Because your father didn't just build the company. He left proof. And Darren doesn't know it exists. Arthur handed me the folder. Inside were old documents, photos, and a faded map marked with a red X. Your father hid a backup of every patent he ever designed before Victor stole them, Arthur said. Blueprints, schematics, financial ledgers, all the evidence needed to prove Vale Holdings was built on theft. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages. If this is real, this could destroy them. Arthur's tone turned serious. That's why you need to be careful. Darren already suspects I've been in contact with you. If he finds out what you're holding, he won't stop until he gets it back. I stared at the folder, torn between fear and fury. So what do I do? Arthur's gaze was steady. You finish what your father started. Take back your name. Expose the truth. Before I could respond, headlights flashed across the street. Arthur's eyes darted to the car approaching fast. Get down! He shouted. The car screeched as a bullet shattered the passenger side window of Arthur's vehicle. I hit the ground, clutching the folder to my chest. 2 masked men jumped out of the car, but Arthur was faster. He pulled a gun from his jacket and fired a warning shot that sent them scrambling back into their car. Go! Arthur yelled. Run! I didn't think, I just ran. Through alleyways, past dumpsters, my lungs burning as I clutched the folder tighter. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my small apartment miles away. When I finally caught my breath, I realized what this meant. The moment I opened that envelope, I'd started a war, and now there was no turning back. The Vales had taken my family, my childhood, and my identity. But this time, they wouldn't take my truth. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, the gunfire, Arthur's face in the headlights, and the folder burning in my hands like it contained the last pieces of my sanity. By sunrise, I knew 2 things for sure. Arthur was right, and I couldn't run anymore. I had proof, real proof, and I was done being silent. I spent the morning combing through the documents, every page revealing something uglier than the last. Bank transfers disguised as consulting fees. Contracts signed by shell companies tied to Victor Vale. Even handwritten letters. Drafts of threats sent to rival inventors. My father's name appeared in several memos, all stamped terminated partnership. Victor hadn't just stolen from him. He'd erased him. One letter caught my eye, my father's handwriting, dated just a week before his death. If anything happens to me, Samuel Hensley, this will serve as notice that Victor Vale is responsible for my disappearance. The proof is locked where only my blood can find it. The last line made my heart race. Only my blood can find it. Arthur's map suddenly made sense. The red X wasn't just a random mark. It was near our old neighborhood, a place I hadn't visited since I was 6. That's where he'd hidden it. By noon, I was on a bus heading there, the folder tucked safely inside my backpack. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same cracked sidewalks, the same lonely park bench where Mom used to feed pigeons. But standing there, I felt something deeper. A connection. A pull. The X on the map led me to an abandoned workshop behind a row of shuttered garages. The padlock was rusted, the windows clouded with dust. I pried it open and stepped inside, the air thick with age and oil. It was exactly how I remembered it. The faint smell of metal, my father's old workbench still standing in the corner. But there was something new. A small metal plaque on the floor with a strange engraving. Legacy lies beneath the flame. I scanned the room until my eyes landed on an old blowtorch mounted to the wall. My father used to call it his flame of creation. Carefully, I pulled it aside and heard a soft click. The plaque lifted, revealing a hidden compartment. My hands trembled as I reached inside and pulled out a weathered lockbox. Inside were 3 USB drives and a sealed envelope. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single line written in my father's handwriting. To my son, when truth finds you, don't fear its fire. Let it burn away the lies. I didn't even realize I was crying until the tears hit the paper. I plugged one of the USBs into my laptop. Dozens of encrypted files appeared. Engineering blueprints, email threads, voice memos. But the one file that caught my eye was a video labeled Confession Final.mp4. I pressed play. My father's face appeared. Older than I remembered, but full of determination. If you're watching this, it means I failed to protect you. Victor Vale wasn't just my partner. He was my thief. He stole my patents, silenced witnesses, and took everything we built. But I've hidden what he wanted most, the master design. Don't let them destroy it. Don't let them win. The video cut out abruptly, but it was enough. Enough to prove everything. Enough to destroy the Vale legacy. Just then, a knock rattled the workshop door. Open up, a voice ordered. We know you're in there. My blood froze. Through the window, I saw 2 black SUVs parked outside, the same kind that had chased Arthur. Darren had found me. The files. The truth. My father's legacy. All of it could be gone in seconds. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I took a deep breath, grabbed the drives, and whispered to myself, let it burn. The pounding on the door grew louder, rattling the hinges. My pulse thudded in my ears as the reality sank in. Darren had sent his father's men. Maybe he was even with them. I shoved the drives into my backpack, grabbed my laptop, and darted toward the back exit. The metal door groaned as I pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, and before I could take a step, I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, kid, a voice called. You have something that doesn't belong to you. I froze, forcing my breath to steady. You mean something your boss stole decades ago? I shot back. Silence. Then the man laughed. A deep, hollow sound that sent chills crawling up my spine. You've got guts, he said. But guts won't keep you alive. I bolted. My legs pumped as I raced down the alley, weaving between rusted fences and abandoned sheds. Shouts erupted behind me, heavy boots hitting the pavement. I didn't look back. All I could think about was the drives in my backpack. The truth. My father's voice. At the end of the alley, a fence blocked the way. I didn't have time to hesitate. I threw my bag over, climbed, and jumped down, scraping my palms on the gravel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Keep running, a voice said. It was Arthur. Arthur? You're alive? No time, he said quickly. They've got your brother's phone tapped. They're tracking your location right now. You need to get to the river. There's a safe house near the old mill. I'll meet you there. The call ended before I could reply. For a second, I stood there, breathless. If Arthur was alive, maybe this wasn't hopeless. Maybe this was part of something bigger. The sky was dimming when I reached the river. The water glimmered under the fading light, and beyond it stood the old textile mill. a massive brick skeleton from another era. I crossed the narrow bridge, my sneakers echoing on the metal grates. Inside, it was silent, except for the creak of the beams and the distant hum of machinery from the city. I followed a faint glow to a corner office. Arthur was there, leaning against the desk, a bandage across his shoulder. "Told you I don't die easy," he said with a smirk. I dropped the backpack onto the desk and pulled out the drives. This is what my father left behind. Blueprints, memos, everything. Enough to bury the veils. Arthur's grin faded. Then it's time we do just that. He pulled out his laptop, connecting one of the drives. We'll upload everything to a dozen public servers at once. Journalists, whistleblower networks, government archives. If Victor wants to bury this, he'll have to dig through the whole damn internet. Before I could respond, the lights flickered. Then, a voice echoed from the shadows. "You really thought it'd be that easy, brother?" Darren stepped into the light, flanked by two men in black. His face was calm, almost sympathetic. "You don't understand what you're doing, Mark. Dad didn't just steal some invention. He built an empire. You destroy this, you destroy us." I glared at him. "Then maybe it deserves to burn," Darren sighed. "I didn't want it to end this way." He nodded toward his men. They reached for their weapons. Before they could move, Arthur hurled a metal pipe across the room, hitting a breaker box. Sparks exploded, plunging the mill into darkness. "Run!" he yelled. Gunfire erupted. I grabbed the bag and sprinted through the maze of machinery as bullets tore through the walls. Glass shattered. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard Arthur shout, then a crash. I turned back for a split second. He was on the ground, fighting one of the men off. "Go," he screamed. "Finish it." And that's when I made the hardest choice of my life. I ran. I ran with the truth, the proof, and the memory of a man who believed in me more than my family ever did. As I burst out into the night, the mill exploded behind me, flames lighting up the sky. The Vale legacy was about to face its reckoning. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sunrise. I stumbled down the embankment, my face smeared with soot, lungs burning from smoke. The backpack with the hard drives was still slung over my shoulder, somehow, miraculously, intact. Behind me, the old mill was a roaring inferno. Sirens echoed in the distance, police, fire, maybe even Vale's private security. I didn't wait to find out. Arthur was gone. I knew it in my gut, but he'd bought me one last chance. I ran until my legs screamed for mercy, until the glow of the flames faded behind me. When I finally reached the highway, I stuck out my thumb and flagged down a passing truck. The driver, a gray-haired man in a flannel jacket, rolled down the window. "You look like hell, son," he said. "Had a rough night," I managed, forcing a grim smile. "Just need a ride into the city." He nodded, wordlessly unlocking the door. As the truck rumbled down the road, I pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I connected the drive to a portable adapter and opened the first folder. There it was. The smoking gun. Financial records. Patents, offshore accounts, and internal memos. All proving how Victor Vale had stolen the biotech formula that made his company worth billions. Even worse, there were files showing government contracts, bribes, and experimental data that hinted people had died because of it. And in one document, stamped confidential, was a signature. My brother's Darren had known. He'd been covering for our father all along. The realization hit like a gut punch. Everything. The favoritism, the inheritance, the betrayal, it all made sense now. Darren wasn't just the golden son. He was Victor's accomplice. By the time I reached the city, dawn was breaking. I slipped into a 24-hour diner, ordered a coffee, and pulled out my laptop. I knew what I had to do. Arthur's plan was clear. Release everything. All at once. No second thoughts. I set up the upload across multiple secure servers. The files began transferring, lines of code racing across the screen. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Mark," said a cold, familiar voice. "If you send those files, it won't just be your life that's over." "Darren," I said quietly. "You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about survival. You think Dad built an empire alone? You think there aren't people behind him who'd kill to keep this quiet?" "Maybe," I said, staring at the progress bar climbing past 60%. "But maybe the world deserves to know anyway." He sighed. "I begged Dad not to cut you out. You could have had everything, a house, money, freedom. But you wanted to play hero." "I never wanted anything from him," I snapped. "Just the truth." "Then you leave me no choice." The line went dead. A few minutes later, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside the diner. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the windows. My heart kicked into overdrive. I unplugged the drive, grabbed the laptop, and ran through the kitchen exit. Bullets shattered the front glass as I bolted into the alley. I jumped a fence, ducked behind a dumpster, and pressed my back to the cold brick wall. The upload was still running on my phone's hotspot. 85%, 90%, 97%, and then 100%. A notification pinged. Files successfully mirrored to all destinations. I stared at the screen, trembling. It was done. The truth was out. Within minutes, I saw the headlines begin to spread. Veil biotech fraud exposed. Whistleblower reveals billion-dollar cover-up. The empire my father built on lies was burning. And this time, there'd be no one left to hide behind. As dawn broke fully over the skyline, I slipped away down the empty street, clutching the last reminder of the life I'd destroyed to save my own soul. The world would finally know who I really was. Not the dumb one, not the failure. I was the truth's son. By noon, the world had changed. Every major network was running the story. My father's face, stern, polished, powerful, was plastered across every channel. The once revered titan of industry was now the centerpiece of a national scandal. The words fraud, cover-up, and criminal investigation screamed in bold letters beneath his photo. I watched from a park bench, my hands trembling around a cup of coffee gone cold. Around me, people scrolled through their phones, whispering to each other. I heard my last name, Veil, pass between strangers' lips like a curse. Victor Veil had finally fallen, and with him, everything I'd known burned to ash the night before. I'd uploaded the files, but I hadn't realized how fast they'd spread. Journalists, whistleblowers, even rival corporations had picked up the trail. By the time the sun rose, there was no undoing it. My father's empire was collapsing in real time. A video surfaced online. My father, storming out of his office as reporters shouted questions. He pushed past them, his usual composure gone. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Then came the news that hit harder than any headline. Darren had been arrested. Authorities raided his penthouse that morning. They found shredded documents, encrypted drives, proof of his involvement. The golden son, the pride of the family, was being escorted in handcuffs down marble stairs. Cameras flashed like fireworks as he shouted, "You don't understand! I did it for the company! For him!" I didn't feel triumphant, just hollow. Arthur's sacrifice, the fire at the mill, the secrets I'd unearthed, all of it had led to this moment. But victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ashes and regret. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Mark." The voice was faint, broken. "Darren." "Don't hang up," he said quickly. "I know what you did. I saw the files, but you don't know the full story." "Darren, there's nothing left to say," I replied, my voice low. "There's everything left to say," he shouted. "Dad didn't just build this empire on lies, he built you on one too." My heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated. I could hear shouting in the background, maybe from the officers near him. Then he said it, the words that shattered what was left of my world. "You're not his son, Mark." I froze. "What?" "Dad adopted you. He pulled you out of an orphanage, not out of love, but because he needed a test subject. You're part of the original biotech program, the one that made him rich. You were the prototype. I couldn't breathe." "He didn't mean for you to find out," Darren continued. "He thought it was cleaner this way, to keep you small, quiet, and out of sight. That's why he never gave you anything. That's why Mom left him. She found out what he'd done. My legs went weak. I sat down hard on the cold bench, the world spinning. Darren, why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve the truth, and because, after everything, you're still my brother." "I'm sorry, Mark." The line went dead. I sat there, motionless, the city buzzing around me like static. The truth, the one I'd spent my whole life chasing, had finally found me. But it wasn't what I wanted. It was darker, deeper, and far more personal than I'd ever imagined. I wasn't a Veil by blood. I wasn't even supposed to exist in this world. And yet somehow, I had destroyed the very foundation of the man who created me. I looked up at the massive Veil Industries billboard across the street. Workers were already dismantling it, taking down the letters one by one. The name that had haunted me since childhood was vanishing before my eyes. I whispered to myself, "Guess I finally escaped the shadow." But in truth, I knew. The shadow had never belonged to my father. It had always belonged to me. Weeks passed before I saw my reflection without flinching. The world had moved on. Headlines shifted, investigations dragged on, and the Veil Empire was officially declared bankrupt. My father faced trial for decades of corruption, while Darren, after a deal with prosecutors, vanished into witness protection. As for me, I disappeared too. I drove for days until the city lights turned to farmland, and the noise of my old life faded into quiet wind. I ended up in a small coastal town, a place where no one cared who the Vales were. I rented a small cottage by the sea and spent my mornings fixing things: fences, roofs, boats. After years of destruction, I needed to build again. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single line: "You were never a mistake. I just couldn't protect you from him, Mom." I stared at the page until the ink blurred. She'd known. All those years, she'd carried the truth alone. That I was never meant to be his heir. Only his experiment. But she had loved me anyway. That was the difference. That was what made me real. I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Outside, the tide rolled in, steady and calm. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. Not my father, not my brother, not the world. I wasn't the dumb one anymore. I was the survivor of a legacy built on lies, and the author of something new. My name is Mark Vale, and this time, the story ends on my terms.